I really believe teachers are still the most important part of a classroom. There's a saying in the United States, no one cares how much you know till they know how much you care. Every student has potential to improve. And I think nowadays, people sometimes feel like technology is controlling them or is making it harder for them to do what they want to do. What we try to do is teach students how to invest their energies in ways that will have good long-term outcomes. Sometimes it does feel like a little more work, but it's usually a good thing. After just a couple weeks of data, we can predict which students are going to be successful in the course and which ones are not.
My name is Rebecca Beiter from the Hector Research Institute of Education Sciences and Psychology. And that's an institute at the University of Tübingen in Germany. And we have a lot of guest professors, guest researchers that are part of the institute. So this episode is going to be in English as we're having a special guest today. Welcome, Jeff Greene.
Thank you so much. And thank you for hosting it in English. I would struggle in German.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, science basically is in English. So we need to do a lot of the stuff that we do, science communicators in English as well. You had quite a long journey till here. So you're coming from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Just to introduce you a little bit, you're an expert in the field of learning technologies, self-regulated learning, digital literacy, and many more topics, just to name a few of them. And basically you study how to help people to use technology to improve their learning. Tell me, is there a specific research question that really motivates you right now to find out a little bit more about it?
Yeah, I want to help people get back to that feeling that technology is helpful and useful for them, and that they're in control of technology and not the other way around. When I was young, I loved technology, and it felt like as every new technology came out, it helped me live my life better, it made me a better person, a better thinker. And I think nowadays, people sometimes feel like technology is controlling them or is making it harder for them to do what they want to do. And I really want to help people get back to that sense of joy and control that I had when I was a young person.
I also had this feeling, I grew up with technology, and I felt like in the earlier days, for example, using laptops a little bit more regularly and getting smartphones in your hand as a child or as a teenager, you still had the possibility to just use these apps a little bit more freely. They didn't give you how you should use them. And I feel like, especially for learning technologies, it might be very, very useful if you can influence a little bit better what the system is like.
Absolutely. Having control over the technology, feeling like your data are safe, feeling like you're not being manipulated by the technology, those are all really important things to feel safe and feel that the technology is useful. And I think there are ways that you can design technology to be that way, and there are ways in which people can kind of take back control of technology, but it's not intuitive, it's not easy, and we need to do it in really thoughtful ways. And so much of my research is about helping people use technology in the way they want to and not the way technologies want to use them.
Can you provide a specific example maybe? Is there already a system out there that's really, really great in doing that?
Well, I do think that there are, for example, social media platforms that provide more control for the user. I mean, social media gets a lot of attention nowadays, understandably, because we don't know what the algorithm's doing, we don't know what it's pushing to us, and sometimes you see things and you wonder, how did that happen? There are social media apps like Blue Sky that don't have an algorithm and that provide a lot of control to the user, and I think that's a really wonderful place for people to practice being thoughtful and being agentic in social media. So I really like that. I also really love learning management systems. So a lot of universities now have a digital learning management system where instructors put their course and students can learn with these systems and read with them. And those provide so many opportunities to really diversify the learning experience. And so
May I ask you, because that's very interesting. I feel like in Germany, we're still at the point where we do have some courses online and still, or of course, we also have online learning systems, but they're definitely not personalized or adapting to your speed of learning or what you actually need. So maybe you can give a little bit of insight. Is it different at your university, for example?
Well, the research that we do is about making them really adaptive and helping both learners and teachers use them more effectively.
So we're not late to the game in Germany. It's still in development.
This is all cutting edge stuff. You're right on time. And in fact, some of the work that we've been doing here at the Hector Institute is about bringing those ideas to Germany. So, when you work with a learning management system, you're clicking on things, you're selecting things, you're spending time in certain places and not others. And we can actually take that data and use it to better understand how students are learning and how we might be able to help them learn more effectively. So some of the work that we've done, after just a couple weeks of data, we can predict which students are going to be successful in the course and which ones are not. And we can then reach out and offer those students resources or coaching or help. And so these learning management systems really can provide a unique way to understand how students are learning and help them learn more effectively.
It's like super interesting. Can you quickly tell me what kind of data is it that you're gathering? Like the time people spend on the system, or how fast they're able to solve different questions they get, or something like that. So what data is it that you gather?
Yeah, so what's really interesting is a lot of this data was originally designed just to help the technology developers understand if the system was working properly. But it's called digital trace data. And really, every time you click on something, every time you open a window, it gets logged as a trace, as an instance of you doing something. And the average person creates millions and millions of lines of data. And what we can do is take that and say, for example, are you doing the things that the instructor asked you to do? Are you doing them in the right order? Are you doing them in a timely manner? Are you doing them before the assignment is due, or are you late? And all that kind of information we can take, and using learning analytics, understand how students are learning and how we can help them do so better.
Do we already have some kind of predictors? What makes a student successful when they use these kind of systems?
So we do have some research that I think is pretty interesting. In the United States, a lot of instructors are moving to what's called a flipped classroom, or an active classroom model, where rather than just talking at students, they ask students to do some things before class to get ready, and then in class they do a lot of active learning, discussion, problem solving. And then after class there's a lot of reflection and kind of consolidating of knowledge. What we have found is that when students actually do those things in the order in which the instructor asks them, those students actually do a lot better in the class. And so that's one finding that's really encouraging, that this kind of structure can really help students succeed. Another one is about timing.
Okay.
And so we have found that certain behaviors, if you do them on time or before they are due, are really predictive of success, and others are less so. So submitting assignments late, obviously, not a great idea. But simple things like downloading the syllabus. I mean, you really probably should do that on the first or second day, but we have some students that wait a long time, and that's not a great sign for success. But when we see students doing that, we can reach out and say, hey, have you seen the syllabus? Can we help you? Would you like us to send it to you? So there are definite predictors of success, but they vary from course to course.
What would you say, what is the role of the still human instructor, professor, or person talking in the classroom, teacher? Are they still like the main source for the learners to get their information, to get the structure, to get a general idea what the course is about? What is their role when technology emerges really fast right now?
Yeah, so I can't quote you a specific study that did a good job comparing no instructor versus instructor learning. What I can tell you is kind of what's in my heart, and I really believe teachers are still the most important part of a classroom. There's a saying in the United States, no one cares how much you know till they know how much you care.
That's a good saying.
Yeah, I mean, people are full people, right? They're not just thinkers, they're feelers. They want to feel a connection to this person who's teaching them. They want to feel valued. They want to understand that person and how they think about the world. And so I still think teachers are the most important factor. All these digital technologies that I love so much, that I think are so wonderful, they are important, but they are not a replacement for a really great teacher.
And I feel like that's already a little bit of motivation why you're doing this. Can you summarize what drives you to do this kind of research? What is the outcome that you're looking for?
I just really love helping people learn. It's just so satisfying when you have a student who can do the work, who has so much potential, and they just quite haven't figured it out. Yeah. And you can see maybe it's frustrating them, and maybe they're starting to get a little pessimistic about themselves. And when you can work with them and figure out, you have all the things you need to be successful, just try it this way or do this different strategy. When you see that work and the student learn and begin to realize the potential, it's just incredibly rewarding. And so that's what drives me, just trying to help every person realize their potential.
And I feel like with these a little bit more technological systems and not depending on a teacher or on a specific school that you maybe need to pay for, maybe we also get a little bit more equality in getting access to the education that we need and getting all the tools that we need in order to have a successful learning experience.
Absolutely. In the past, some students were lucky enough to have a teacher or a parent or a family member that could kind of teach them how to learn more effectively. And many students just didn't have that opportunity. And just think of all the potential that wasn't maximized because of that. Nowadays, with digital technologies, we can really scale that instruction on the science of learning and how to help people maximize their abilities. We can scale that so much more easily and help even more students be successful regardless of their background or where they come from.
I feel like most of the time right now we talked about students at the university level. Is there a difference between university or maybe pupils or even kindergarten children that may also already use some kind of personalized learning system or learning management system?
Yeah, so the personalization changes, but the need for it and the benefits of it stay the same. So I really think digital technologies and personalization can help all students regardless of their age. Obviously, you wouldn't try to teach a kindergartner calculus or how to do a lot of advanced learning techniques, so you kind of tailor it to where the student's at. But the research would say that all students have potential, all students have capacity. And when we figure out how to tune the educational experience to what they're good at and what they need to learn, they thrive.
In Germany, we're always a little bit afraid of new technology, and especially data protection is a huge topic here, which of course is okay, but there's this one question in the air right now that we get asked a lot from teachers, for example, and especially from parents. What is happening to the data with my child, from my child, and what is happening, for example, if my child is a slow learner in the beginning and is categorized as such by a learning management system? Will it always just get the easy questions, the easy track, and won't be able to start really growing and learning, which maybe a human person would just thrive him to do?
Right. Yeah, we want to avoid that. So it really is an important trust that we ask of students, of parents, of teachers. And so I never want a digital technology to categorize a student as slow or anything else and then leave them in that space. What I like to focus on is what's the student good at right now and where do they need to improve? And I really firmly believe that all students can get better. All students can become more effective and more efficient learners. We just need to figure out kind of how to help them. And sometimes that's a little tricky, but every student has potential to improve. And so I would never want to categorize a student that way. And I think the people who design these technologies have to be held accountable, right? We have to make sure that they have in place security and safety of data, but also that they have the right ideas in mind when they're working with students. And one of those ideas has to be that all students can improve, all students can get better. And when we ask students to challenge themselves, we hold them to high expectations, they meet them.
If people out there want to get a little bit deeper into the research around this whole area, are there specific publications that you would recommend them to read in advance to get a good overview? Maybe even some of your own. So
there's an area called self-regulated learning that's really important, and that's the study of how people can take control of their learning and be more active. I think another thing to look at is the area of learning analytics. So there's a journal of learning analytics, and that's all about using that digital trace data to understand students. That's a really important area that I think students and interested researchers should check out. And then most recently in the Journal of Educational Psychology, there was a special issue all about learning analytics and using theory and self-regulated learning theory to help students be successful. So that'd be a great place to go first to learn more about what we're doing.
Thank you for that. You just talked about self-regulated learning, and I feel like that's a very important topic right now. Can you quickly explain what is meant by the term self-regulated learning? Maybe not everyone has heard it yet.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think all of us have habits. We have routines, right? So you wake up in the morning and maybe you brush your teeth and you make breakfast and you don't have to think too much about that. And when those routines work well, that's wonderful, right? Because if you had to think really carefully about every moment of your day, it would be exhausting, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Well, we do the same thing for learning, right? So when we're asked to learn something, maybe we have some strategies we use, like reading a chapter or maybe taking some notes. And when that works well, wonderful. People should do that. There are times where it doesn't work well. And when your regular habits for learning don't work well, you need to self-regulate. You need to recognize that those habits or strategies aren't working, and then actively say, let me try something else. I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to seek out some help. That's what self-regulation is. It's the active involvement in learning and being really thoughtful about how you're learning. It also involves knowledge of other strategies, right? So some students know that what they're doing isn't working, but unfortunately they just haven't been taught good learning strategies. And so part of self-regulated learning research is about how do we teach students to have like a really full toolbox of strategies so that when their habits don't work for them, they have other options to go to.
Are there specific habits people should look out for that already indicates that probably is going to be a hard learning experience?
Well, there are certainly habits that we want students to acquire, and a lot of those involve what we call desirable difficulties. And this is kind of counterintuitive, but it's kind of like a muscle. You have to exercise to grow a muscle. You've got to exercise your brain to make it grow stronger and more powerful. And so sometimes the things that make learning seem a little harder, whether it's like explaining to yourself what you're learning or taking really detailed notes or testing yourself, that can make it feel like learning's harder, but in the long run, you learn it better, you remember it for a longer period of time, and you can do more with it. And so what we try to do is teach students how to invest their energies in ways that will have good long-term outcomes. Sometimes it does feel like a little more work, but it's usually a good thing. That's why I get a little worried when people use, like, for example, generative AI to replace some of that work, because just like your muscles don't grow if someone else lifts the weight, you have to engage in those things to learn.
You still need to use your brain. It's just you need to want to use your brain.
That's right. Yeah. And the more you use it, I think the stronger it gets and the more effective it gets and starts to feel better, it gets easier. But you can never replace that effort. If you really want to understand something, you've got to put in the effort to understand it.
I would love to go a little bit more meta with the last part of the questions, which mean most teachers that come to us or that we talk to say, well, it's interesting what you do. Of course, education sciences and all the research about it, cool. But we have real problems here in the classrooms. For example, we have too many students. We have very different students from different backgrounds, and we all need to teach them in the same class. We have people who don't even speak our language properly enough that we can actually work with them in the classroom. So we have other problems right now, and what you do is like high up in the clouds. What would you tell these people? Why is it still important that we do this kind of research?
Well, first of all, everything that you just said is really important, and we absolutely want to pay attention to that. We need to recognize and honor teachers, and part of that is taking their concerns seriously. And so whenever a teacher says, what you're telling me right now isn't so helpful, I have this problem, I try to turn my attention to that problem. That said, I do think the science of learning, like self-regulated learning and other ideas, really can help teachers become more effective and more efficient, same with students. And sometimes when teachers are having a problem with a student or set of students, if you can all gather around a learning idea, if you can all gather around like, let's try to learn this way today, that can really be a way to create connections and get everyone focused on the same thing and moving in the same direction. And that can be really powerful. And so I think students respond really positively to success. And if we can help them be more successful, I think that helps with a lot of the other issues that our teachers are facing right now.
Is there anything that you would love to add to the questions I just asked? Anything that you feel like that's a topic we haven't talked about enough yet?
The only thing that comes to mind is kind of the current crisis in knowledge and kind of people questioning misinformation. That. So, misinformation and just what some people call the infodemic, like a pandemic of information, can be really overwhelming for people. And part of education has to be about helping people figure out where are good sources of information, where are less good sources of information, and then how do I not only think critically, but I also critically ignore certain things. And so one part of my work is about what we call curation. How do you go into your social media feed? How do you go into your bookmarks and say, these are the ones that are really valuable for me. I'm going to critically think about those. And then these other ones aren't so valuable. I'm going to critically ignore those. And so those are skills that I really hope teachers are working with their students to develop because they've never been more important.
Yeah, you just get overwhelmed when you open your apps. You have so much information you need to process.
Yep.
And of course, there are good filter apps. As for example, in my area of work, I definitely have some filters that just provide me the most important news of the day, so I'm just up to date. Specifically in the context of learning, are there already good filter apps or skills that you should practice specifically?
Yeah, so I don't recommend any specific apps. I'll let people kind of find their own, but I do think there's some really important skills. And a couple of them are, first of all, determining whether the sources that you're paying attention to are reliable. So are they giving you information that helps you live your life, right? Do they give you good advice? Do they help you understand things better? That takes some time to figure out, but it's really important to figure out. Because like you said, you want to identify the sources that are reliable and then just pay attention to those and not every day have to sift through a whole bunch of junk. Another thing I like is looking at sources that are held accountable, right? So I belong to professional societies. If I was on your show here and I said things that were just completely incorrect or outside the boundaries of ethics, my professional society would hold me accountable. And so I rely on sources that can also be held accountable, whatever that means. The last thing I'd say is I really look for sources that have what we call intellectual humility. So I rely upon experts. I trust them. I think they're important. But every expert should be humble enough to say, maybe I don't have all the answers. And when presented with compelling evidence, they should change their mind and they should admit, hey, you know what? I thought this, now I think that. That kind of humility is really important to see, and I look for that in my sources.
And I feel like that's the main thing scientists have as an inner attitude. We all know we have maybe a status quo of what we know yet, but we all know the next study, the next research we do might change that. And we might not be perfectly correct with what we think is true, and we need to adjust. So
Absolutely.
I feel like the attitude of science is always a good thing to just talk to the public, because it also can help them.
Yeah, and it's not intuitive, right? You kind of think like, well, of course, scientists, they're an expert, they should know the answer.
They're always right.
Yeah, but there's a big difference between what we call consensus science, right? So the earth is round, that's consensus. And then frontier science, right? Things that are just being discovered and discussed. A lot of things on the frontier can change with time, and that's perfectly normal, and that's a good thing about science. And experts should have the humility to say, you know what? I kind of thought it was this way, but I found out it's that way. That's a good thing.
And I feel like, especially with learning technologies right now, because there's so many changes, especially when you count in AI, people always ask, is it now good or bad to use these systems?
Right.
And most of the time it's hard to tell them, well, for some cases we just don't know yet. They're still so new, we're still doing the research on it. We don't have an answer yet.
We don't. Yeah, and I think scientists should be really upfront about that. There's a lot of talk right now about social media and is it harmful or not. And the truth is we don't really know. A lot of the evidence is mixed, and we have some instincts and we have some ideas, and I think that shouldn't stop us from making good decisions, for example, about whether social media or technology should be used in schools, in what ways. But I don't know that any scientist at the moment should just say, yes, this is a settled issue. Social media is good or bad. It's not that simple.
Cool. Thank you so much for being here and answering all these questions. It was a very interesting talk. Thank you.
Thanks so much for talking with me today.